The crystal chandelier above the mahogany dining table cast shadows that seemed to dance with malice as my cousin Victoria raised her wineglass and delivered what she thought would be the killing blow. "Here's to family success stories," she announced, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "and to those who still think waiting tables at 32 counts as having a career." The entire room erupted in laughter, 23 members of the Rodriguez family all turning their eyes toward me like vultures circling prey. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat there in my thrift store dress, the one I'd carefully steamed that morning to look presentable, watching my grandmother's antique silverware catch the light as hands reached for more wine to fuel their entertainment. My Uncle Carlos, the family patriarch who owned 3 car dealerships across Miami, slapped the table so hard the gravy boat jumped. "Remember when she said she was going to change the world?" he wheezed between laughs. "Look how that turned out! Maya, the revolutionary, serving breadsticks to pay rent!" What they didn't notice, what none of them saw, was the woman sitting quietly in the corner, her laptop discreetly open, fingers occasionally tapping notes into what looked like a casual email, but was actually something much more significant. Sarah Chan had introduced herself as Victoria's college friend, a journalist visiting from New York, but I recognized her immediately. Forbes' senior technology reporter. I'd seen her byline on dozens of articles, had watched her interviews with industry titans, had even quoted her work in presentations that my family would never see. The humiliation had started the moment I walked through the door of my Aunt Carmen's Coral Gables mansion. "Maya," she'd said, her eyes scanning my outfit with barely concealed disgust, "you know we have a dress code for family gatherings. This isn't one of your little coffee shops." The comment stung because she knew exactly why I was dressed the way I was. For 3 years, I'd been playing a role, letting my family believe I was struggling, letting them think I was the failure they'd always predicted I'd become. It hadn't always been this way. Growing up, I was the family golden child, the first Rodriguez to get into MIT, the one everyone said would make them proud. But when I dropped out junior year to start a company, the disappointment was swift and brutal. "You're throwing away your future for some fantasy," my father had raged during our last real conversation 5 years ago. "Come home, finish school, get a real job, like your cousins." When I refused, I became the family cautionary tale, the reminder of what happens when you reach too high. So when I found a neuropath 3.5 years ago in a cramped studio apartment in Winewood, I made a decision that would change everything. I would let them think I'd failed. I got a part-time job at a trendy restaurant in South Beach, just enough to maintain the fiction, and told anyone who asked that my startup had crashed and burned. I watched them exchange knowing looks, heard the whispered conversations about how they'd seen it coming, felt the mixture of pity and satisfaction in their voices when they asked about my little business venture in past tense. The irony was exquisite. While they thought I was slinging coffee and living paycheck to paycheck, Neuropath was quietly revolutionizing artificial intelligence for medical diagnostics. We'd started with 5 employees in my apartment and grown to 230 across 3 offices. Our algorithms were being used in hospitals from Boston to Berlin, helping doctors detect cancer months earlier than traditional methods. But I kept showing up to family events in my server uniform, kept letting them slip me $20 bills for gas money, kept playing the role of the family disappointment. Now, sitting at this Christmas dinner table while my cousin Marcus explained to his 8-year-old son why Aunt Maya was a good example of why you need to work hard in school, I watched Sarah Chen's eyebrows raise slightly as she typed something into her laptop. She'd been taking notes all evening, and I wondered if she was documenting the family dynamics for anthropological curiosity, or if something else had caught her attention. "The problem with Maya," my cousin Alana was saying as she carved the turkey with unnecessary aggression, "is that she never learned to be realistic, always had her head in the clouds, always thought she was smarter than everyone else. She pointed the carving knife toward me for emphasis. Look where that arrogance got you, 32 years old and nothing to show for it." My cousin Ricardo, who'd failed the bar exam 3 times before finally becoming a personal injury lawyer, nodded sagely. I tried to warn her back in college. I said, Maya, you're not Steve Jobs. You can't just drop out and expect to change the world. But would she listen? No. Too proud, too stubborn, too convinced she knew better than the rest of us who actually finished our educations and built real careers. The comments kept coming, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. They brought up every perceived failure from the past 5 years. Every time I'd shown up looking tired from 18-hour days they assumed were spent dealing with difficult customers. Every occasion I'd been too distracted by work they thought was beneath me to fully engage with family gossip. They dissected my choices with the clinical precision of surgeons, each diagnosis conforming what they'd known all along. I was the Rodriguez family cautionary tale, the reminder that ambition without reality leads to poverty and disappointment. What made it worse was that some part of me had internalized their expectations. There were nights when I'd lie awake in my downtown Miami penthouse, the one they didn't know I owned, wondering if I should just tell them the truth. But then I'd remember the way they'd celebrated when they thought I'd failed, the satisfaction in their voices when they discussed my learning experience, the way they'd used my supposed failure to teach their children about the importance of staying in your lane. They'd made my failure a family mythology, and I'd let them because their reaction revealed something about who they really were. My grandmother, the family matriarch, who'd emigrated from Cuba with nothing and built a small empire of laundromats, had been quiet through most of the dinner, but now she looked up from her plate, her cloudy eyes settling on me with something that might have been disappointment or might have been pity. Mija, when I was your age, I had 4 children and 2 businesses. I didn't have time for dreams that don't put food on the table. Maybe it's time you stop chasing fantasies and start building a real life. The words hit harder than all the others combined, because they came from the woman I'd always admired most, the woman whose work ethic and determination had inspired my own entrepreneurial spirit. She'd built something from nothing, had sacrificed everything for her family's future, and here she was lumping me in with the dreamers and the failures, the people too impractical to understand that survival mattered more than ambition. I felt the familiar weight of the secret I'd been carrying, the knowledge that would shatter their comfortable narrative about the family failure. Neuropath wasn't just successful, it was extraordinary. 3 weeks ago, we'd closed our Series C funding round at a valuation of $800 million. Forbes had called it one of the most significant AI breakthroughs of the decade. Sarah Chen herself had written the article, which is why I recognized her immediately when Victoria introduced her as a friend. But as I sat there, absorbing their mockery, watching Sarah Chen's fingers pause over her laptop keyboard, I realized something profound was happening. This wasn't just a family dinner anymore. This was documentation. And tomorrow, when the world learned the truth about Neuropath's latest breakthrough, when the Forbes cover story revealed the identity of the mysterious CEO who'd revolutionized medical AI while staying completely out of the public eye, this dinner would become something else entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Press embargo lifts at midnight EST. Are you ready? I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. 11:47. In 13 minutes, everything would change. I looked around the table at my family, still laughing, still celebrating what they thought was my failure, still building their self-worth on the foundation of my supposed disappointment. Then I caught Sarah Chen's eye and saw something that made my heart race. Recognition. She knew exactly who I was, and she was here not as Victoria's friend, but as a journalist, documenting what might be the most ironic family dinner in business history. The chandelier kept casting its dancing shadows, but now they looked different, less like malice and more like the approaching dawn. The grandfather clock chimed midnight with the solemnity of a cathedral bell, and my phone immediately erupted with notifications, text after text, email after email, all carrying the same electric energy of a story that was about to reshape everything my family thought they knew about the world. I watched the screen light up with messages from venture capitalists, journalists, and board members, each one congratulating me on what TechCrunch was already calling the medical AI revelation of the decade. Sarah Chen's laptop screen reflected the blue glow of what I knew was the Forbes homepage, where my face now occupied the digital real estate usually reserved for tech billionaires and Fortune 500 CEOs. The headline read, "The Invisible Genius: How Maya Rodriguez Built an $800 million AI Empire While the World Wasn't Watching." Below it, a photograph from our Series C announcement showed me in my laboratory, surrounded by the neural network displays that had become my life's work, looking nothing like the failure my family had spent the evening dissecting. Victoria was midway through another story about my supposed incompetence when Sarah quietly turned her laptop screen toward the table. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and devastating. My cousin Marcus stopped talking mid-sentence, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. My Aunt Carmen's fork clacked.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
My uncle Carlos, who had been so confident in his mockery just minutes before, was now staring at the Forbes article with the expression of a man watching his worldview crumble in real time. "But you work at that restaurant," he said weakly. "We've seen you there. You've told us about your shifts, about difficult customers, about barely making rent." "I worked there exactly 12 hours a week," I explained, watching comprehension dawn slowly across their faces. "Just enough to maintain the story you all wanted to believe. The rest of my time was spent building something that's going to change medicine forever." I pulled out my phone and showed them the notification from our head of communications. "Tomorrow morning, we're announcing our partnership with Johns Hopkins to implement neural path technology in their entire oncology department. The contract is worth $47 million. The number hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. My cousin Ricardo, who'd been so certain about my lack of realistic thinking, was frantically scrolling through his own phone, pulling up articles about NeuralPath that he'd apparently never bothered to read, despite the company being headquartered 20 minutes from his office. "Holy shit," he breathed, then immediately looked at my grandmother apologetically. "Sorry, abuela, but Maya, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were struggling? Why did you let us say those things?" The question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure had finally arrived. I looked around the table at faces that had been so confident in their superiority just moments before, now twisted with confusion and something that might have been shame. "Because," I said slowly, "I needed to know who you really were. I needed to understand what my family valued, what brought you joy, what made you feel better about your own lives." I stood up, feeling the weight of 3.5 years of deception lifting from my shoulders. Every cruel comment tonight, every moment of satisfaction you took in what you thought was my failure, every time you used my story to teach your children about the importance of staying practical and realistic, you showed me exactly who you are. You're people who find comfort in others' suffering. You're people who measure your worth by comparing yourself to those you think are beneath you. My grandmother was still holding my business card, her eyes moving between the cardstock and my face as if trying to reconcile two different people. "But the money you borrowed from us for your apartment deposit," she said. "The times you let us pay for dinner. The Christmas gifts we gave you because we thought you couldn't afford nice things." "I never asked for any of it," I replied gently. "You offered because it made you feel good about yourselves. The apartment deposit you insisted on giving me went into a scholarship fund I created for foster children interested in STEM careers. The dinner money you forced on me gets donated to food banks. The Christmas gifts sit in my office, reminders of what people do when they think they're being charitable to someone they consider beneath them." Victoria was scrolling through article after article, her face growing paler with each headline. "Forbes calls you a visionary," she read aloud. "MIT Technology Review says you're reshaping the future of healthcare. The Wall Street Journal has you on their list of most influential women in technology. She looked up at me with something approaching horror. Maya, you could buy everything I own. You could buy everything any of us own. Several times over. But that's not the point. The point is that you spent tonight celebrating what you thought was my failure instead of asking if I needed help, instead of offering support, instead of treating me like family. You turned my life into entertainment. My Uncle Carlos was frantically typing on his phone, and I could see him pulling up our company's recent press releases. It says here you employ over 200 people, he said, his voice hollow. It says you've created technology that could revolutionize cancer treatment. Maya, you're not just successful, you're saving lives. Every day, our algorithms have helped doctors detect stage 1 pancreatic cancer in patients who would have gone undiagnosed for months. We've identified genetic markers for rare diseases that previously took years to catch. Last month, our technology helped a hospital in Phoenix discover a brain tumor in a 6-year-old girl during what was supposed to be a routine scan for a completely unrelated issue. They operated the next day. Without our intervention, she would have been dead within 6 months. The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. These weren't abstract numbers or business metrics I was discussing. These were real people who existed because of work I'd been doing while my family assumed I was wasting my potential serving appetizers to tourists. Sarah Chen had been quietly typing throughout the exchange, and now she looked up with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something historically significant. This is going to be the most read article Forbes publishes this year, she said. The story of the woman who let her family mock her while she quietly revolutionized medicine. The entrepreneur who let people think she was serving tables while she was actually serving humanity. My cousin Marcus was now reading directly from his phone screen. According to Bloomberg, NeuralPath is expected to go public within the next 18 months at a valuation that could exceed $5 billion. He looked up at me with something approaching awe. Maya, that would make you one of the richest self-made women in America. Wealth isn't the goal, I said quietly. Impact is. But yes, the IPO projections are accurate. I gathered my purse and stood to leave, feeling lighter than I had in years. The irony is that you were right about one thing tonight. I did change, and I am different from the rest of the family. But not in the way you thought. The room remained silent as I walked toward the door, their world fundamentally altered by information that had been hiding in plain sight. Tomorrow, Sarah Chen's article would be shared millions of times, quoted in business schools and referenced in discussions about family dynamics and success for years to come. But tonight, it was just the sound of my heels clicking against marble floors as I left behind people who had revealed their true nature when they thought no one important was watching. The Forbes article went live at 6 a.m. Eastern, and by 7:30, my phone was ringing with calls from every major news network in the country. Good Morning America wanted an exclusive interview, CNN was offering a primetime special, The Today Show was prepared to fly a crew to Miami within hours. But I was already on my private jet to Boston, where Massachusetts General Hospital was waiting to sign the largest medical AI contract in history. Sarah Chen's article had done more than document a family dinner. It had created a cultural phenomenon. The story of the woman who let her family mock her while she quietly revolutionized medicine resonated with millions of people who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel like failures by those closest to them. Within 24 hours, the hashtag Maya Rodriguez moment was trending worldwide, with people sharing their own stories of hidden achievements and family skepticism. But the real consequences were just beginning to unfold for the Rodriguez family. Victoria was the first to feel the impact when her marketing firm lost 3 major clients within a week. Apparently, being known as the woman who spent Christmas dinner humiliating a medical pioneer wasn't the kind of association luxury brands wanted. Her business partner suggested she take a leave of absence until the media attention died down, though we both knew that might take years. My cousin Marcus discovered that his law firm was suddenly very interested in his family connections, but not in the way he had expected. The senior partners called him into a meeting where they explained that having a relative who had publicly mocked one of the most prominent women in technology was creating complications with their tech industry clients. Several firms had specifically requested that Marcus not be assigned to their cases. His partnership track had effectively ended before Christmas dinner was even fully digested. The most devastating consequences fell on my Uncle Carlos and his car dealership empire. Neural Path's success had made me something of a celebrity in Miami's business community, and word spread quickly about how my family had treated me. Carlos discovered that the kind of people who could afford luxury vehicles were often the same people who read Forbes and followed technology news. His sales dropped by 40% in the first month after the article, as customers decided they didn't want to buy cars from someone who had so spectacularly failed to recognize talent in his own family. My Aunt Carmen, who had been so concerned about dress codes and maintaining appearances, found herself excluded from the very social circles she'd spent decades cultivating. The country club set that had once hung on her every word about proper behavior and family standards suddenly found her presence embarrassing. Invitations stopped arriving. Phone calls went unreturned. The woman who had built her identity on being the family's social arbiter discovered that society had rendered its own judgment on her behavior. But perhaps the most profound change came from my grandmother, who requested a private meeting 3 weeks after the dinner. I found her sitting in her small apartment above one of her laundromats, surrounded by newspaper clippings about Neural Path and medical breakthroughs. She'd printed every article she could find, creating a shrine to accomplishments she'd dismissed as fantasy just weeks before. "Mija," she said when I walked in, her voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "I spent 70 years believing that survival was more important than dreams. I built my businesses by being practical, by never reaching for anything I couldn't touch. When I looked at you, I saw myself at your age, full of ideas that seemed too big for reality." She gestured to the newspaper clippings covering her coffee table. "But you didn't just dream. You built something that matters more than all my laundromats combined. You're saving lives, and I called you impractical." The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd ever had. She told me about her own abandoned dreams, the inventions she'd sketched but never pursued, the business ideas she dismissed as too risky. She'd spent so long focused on immediate survival that she'd forgotten to look up and imagine what might be possible. Seeing my success had forced her to confront not just her treatment of me, but her own self-imposed limitations. "I want to invest," she said finally. "Not just money, though I have some saved. I want to invest my time, my energy, my experience. If you'll have me, I want to help build something that matters." That conversation led to the creation of the Rodriguez Foundation, funded initially with $20 million from my personal holdings and focused on supporting immigrant entrepreneurs who might otherwise lack access to venture capital. My grandmother became our first board member and our most passionate advocate, using her 7 decades of business experience to mentor founders who reminded her of her younger self. The woman who had once dismissed dreams as impractical became the foundation's most effective champion for taking calculated risks on ambitious visions. The foundation's first major success came 8 months later, when we funded a young immigrant from El Salvador who had developed a revolutionary water purification system. The technology could provide clean drinking water to rural communities at a fraction of the current cost, potentially impacting millions of lives across Latin America. When 60 Minutes profiled the foundation's work, they interviewed my grandmother about the transformation in her thinking. "Maya taught me that the biggest risk isn't failure," she said, looking directly into the camera. "The biggest risk is never trying at all." Meanwhile, Neural Path continued its meteoric rise. Our IPO launched 18 months after that Christmas dinner, opening at $87 per share and closing the first day at $143. The company was now valued at $8.7 billion, making me not just one of the richest self-made women in America, but one of the youngest billionaires in history. More importantly, our technology was now being used in over 2,000 hospitals worldwide, with documented cases of lives saved numbering in the tens of thousands.
The media attention never fully subsided, but it evolved into something more substantial than celebrity coverage. Harvard Business School developed a case study around the Christmas dinner incident, using it to examine how unconscious bias affects family dynamics and business relationships. The case became required reading in their entrepreneurship program, with students analyzing how my family's assumptions about success had blinded them to evidence of actual achievement. Sarah Chen won a Pulitzer Prize for her follow-up investigation into how family dynamics influence entrepreneurial success, using my story as a launching point for a broader examination of support systems and achievement. Her book, The Invisible Entrepreneurs, became a bestseller and established her as one of the most respected business journalists of her generation. She often credited that Christmas dinner with teaching her to look beyond surface appearances when evaluating success and failure. 2 years after the dinner, Victoria reached out through my assistant, requesting a meeting. We met at a coffee shop in Wynwood, not far from the studio apartment where Neural had been born. She looked older, worn down by the consequences of that evening and the public scrutiny that had followed. "I've lost everything," she said without preamble. "My business, my social circle, my confidence. I wanted to apologize, but I also wanted to understand. How did you do it? How did you build something so incredible while we all thought you were failing?" I explained the years of 18-hour days, the technical challenges overcome, the regulatory hurdles navigated, the hundreds of meetings with skeptical investors who needed to be convinced that a young Latina from Miami could revolutionize medical technology. I told her about the nights I'd gone home exhausted from family gatherings where I'd been treated as a charity case, only to return to laboratories where I was developing technology that would change the world. "But why didn't you tell us?" she asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Why let us think you were struggling when you were actually succeeding beyond anything any of us had achieved?" "Because I needed to know who you were when you thought I couldn't do anything for you. I needed to understand whether your love was conditional on my success, whether your respect depended on my ability to impress you." The answer was more revealing than any family therapy session could have been. Victoria left that meeting with something she hadn't possessed in months: purpose. She used her marketing background to launch a nonprofit focused on helping women entrepreneurs navigate family skepticism and build support networks outside traditional structures. Her personal experience with the consequences of dismissing family ambition gave her credibility with founders who had faced similar challenges. Within a year, her organization was helping hundreds of women find the encouragement their family had failed to provide. Today, 5 years after that Christmas dinner, the entire trajectory of the Rodriguez family has changed. My success didn't just vindicate my choices, it forced everyone to examine their own assumptions about achievement, support, and the true meaning of family loyalty. Some, like my grandmother and Victoria, used the revelation as an opportunity for growth and redemption. Others continued to struggle with the cognitive dissonance of having so completely misjudged someone they thought they knew. The Christmas dinner that was supposed to be my final humiliation became the moment when everything shifted. Sarah Chen's article captured not just a family shock at discovering hidden success, but a broader truth about how we measure worth and recognize achievement. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving you were right, it's revealing who people really are when they think you're powerless to do anything about it. The chandelier in my Aunt Carmen's dining room still casts the same shadows, but the people gathered beneath it are forever changed. And somewhere in a laboratory in Cambridge, researchers are using neural path technology to detect diseases that would have gone unnoticed until it was too late, saving lives while my family finally understands that the real failure that night wasn't mine at all. Standing in my corner office overlooking Boston Harbor, I can see the Massachusetts General Hospital complex where our latest AI system is helping doctors detect neurological conditions that were previously invisible until it was too late. The wall behind my desk displays the covers of magazines that once seemed impossible to imagine. Time's Person of the Year for Advancing Medical Technology, Forbes' Most Powerful Women in Healthcare, MIT Technology Review's Innovator of the Year. But the item I treasure most is a small framed photo from last Christmas, exactly 1 year after that infamous dinner. This time the gathering was different. We met at my penthouse with a view that stretched across Biscayne Bay, and the conversation flowed around achievements instead of assumed failures. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, regaling everyone with stories about the foundation's latest success stories. Victoria brought her nonprofit's annual report, proud to share how many women entrepreneurs they'd supported through family skepticism. Even my uncle Carlos had found his footing again, his dealership's now thriving as customers appreciated his newfound humility and genuine interest in supporting local business leaders. The most powerful moment came when my 8-year-old nephew asked me what I did for work. Instead of the awkward silence that question would have generated a year earlier, the entire table erupted in excited explanations from family members who now understood and celebrated what I'd built. They spoke with genuine pride about lives saved, medical breakthroughs achieved, and the ripple effects of innovation that started in a small Miami apartment. That Christmas dinner taught me something profound about redemption and growth. People can change when confronted with the truth about themselves, but only if they're willing to examine their assumptions and acknowledge their mistakes. Some of my family members rose to that challenge and became better versions of themselves. Others remained trapped in their old patterns, unable to reconcile their previous certainty with new realities. The real victory wasn't in proving them wrong about my potential. It was in creating space for them to prove they could be better than their worst moments. Success isn't just about building something remarkable. It's about using that platform to lift others up, even those who once tried to tear you down. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens not in the person who achieves, but in the people who witness achievement and realize they need to transform themselves. Neural Path continues to grow, but more importantly, it continues to matter. Every diagnostic breakthrough, every life saved, every family that gets more time together because